It was just another Texas morning. The sun was rising, the highway humming with the sound of trucks and cars rushing toward the city. Daniel had a coffee in his cup holder, country music low on the radio, and a list of deliveries waiting at his small construction supply store. Life wasn't perfect, but it was steady. He had built the business with his own two hands, and every day he carried himself with the quiet pride of a man who worked for everything he had. But that morning everything changed in the span of a few seconds. A semi lost control on the wet pavement. Daniel saw nothing but the blur of headlights and the screech of metal before the impact crushed into his pickup. The world spun, glass shattered, steel bent, and then there was silence. Darkness wrapped around him like heavy water. When Daniel finally opened his eyes, it wasn't in his truck. It was in a hospital bed, his body stiff, the steady beeping of machines filling the room. His mouth was dry, his throat sore, and when he tried to move his legs, nothing happened. Panic spread through him. He tried again, harder this time, still nothing. A doctor stepped closer, his face calm but heavy with the kind of truth no one wants to deliver. He spoke gently, but the words cut deeper than any wound. Daniel's spine had been badly damaged. The doctor explained that walking again was unlikely. Daniel's chest tightened. Just yesterday he had been loading lumber, climbing ladders, shouting to workers from across the yard. Yesterday he was a man who could run, stand tall, and carry his daughter on his shoulders. And now he couldn't even wiggle his toes. The weight of it all pressed down on him. His business, his family, his life. It felt like everything had been taken in one cruel strike. As the doctor's words echoed in his mind, Daniel stared at the ceiling tiles above him, wondering how a man who never backed down from anything was supposed to face a battle he couldn't even stand up to fight. And deep down, a question began to burn. Was this the end of the man he used to be, or the beginning of something else? Recovery was supposed to mean progress, but for Daniel, it felt like watching his life shrink 1 inch at a time. The hospital walls became his world, and the wheelchair his prison. At first, Claire tried. She sat by his bed, smiling when doctors came in, holding Emma's hand tight when the little girl asked questions no one wanted to answer. Claire brought books, folded laundry, even pretended they would get back to normal soon. But the weeks dragged on, the endless alarms, the smell of antiseptic, the sight of her husband strapped into machines, each day chipped away at her resolve. Daniel could see it in her eyes. The fatigue, the fear, the way she looked at him and saw not the man who built their life, but the shell of him. One evening she arrived without Emma. She set her purse on the chair and sat quietly at his side, her hands twisting the hem of her sleeve. Daniel waited for her to speak, but the silence was louder than anything. Finally, she whispered, "I've tried, Daniel. God knows I've tried. But I can't do this anymore." His chest tightened. "Claire, please, we'll figure it out. We always do." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice stayed firm. "You don't understand. I'm not strong enough for this. Emma, she needs more than I can give if I stay, and you..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "You need someone who can see hope here. All I see is what we've lost." She reached for his hand, but Daniel pulled back, his jaw set. The papers slid onto the table with a soft thud, heavier than any brick he had ever carried. Divorce. Claire wiped her cheeks, stood and whispered, "I'm sorry." Then she was gone. When Daniel was discharged weeks later, the house felt hollow. The furniture sat in its usual places. The pictures still hung on the walls, but everything was quieter. The only sound was the creak of the wheelchair lift, carrying him up and down like a reminder of what he had become. Emma's room was the one place still alive. She was 10, still full of energy, but Daniel noticed how her smile faltered whenever he fumbled, burning toast, dropping a pan, struggling with the laundry. She tried to be brave, humming while she coloured at the table, but at night Daniel sometimes caught her clutching her pillow, whispering, "I miss Mom." And in those moments the weight crushed him more than the accident ever had. He had lost his wife, and if he wasn't careful he might lose his daughter's faith too. That thought alone kept him breathing, even when he wanted to give up. The days at home dragged on like slow-moving storms. Daniel tried to keep things together for Emma, but the truth was obvious. He couldn't carry laundry up the stairs, couldn't drive her to school, couldn't even stand long enough to cook a simple meal without feeling useless. The frustration built until silence became his shield. He stopped asking for help. He just wheeled himself through the motions, doing what he could, pretending the rest didn't matter. But Emma was only 10. She needed rides to school, lunches packed, a steady hand guiding her through the small, ordinary moments that kept kids safe and grounded. That's when Maria showed up at their door. She lived 2 houses down, a nurse who worked long shifts at the county clinic, raising her son on her own. Her life wasn't easy either, but she carried herself with a calm strength. She had noticed Emma walking alone down the street one morning, her backpack sliding off her shoulder. By the time she pulled her car over to offer a ride, Emma's eyes were already wet. When Maria knocked on Daniel's door later that evening, he bristled. He hated the look of pity, hated the idea of being someone's charity case. "I'm fine," he muttered, not even meeting her eyes. Maria didn't argue. She just handed him a grocery bag. Inside were eggs, milk and bread, things he hadn't realised Emma had quietly skipped for days. Daniel's pride flared, but before he could snap, Emma's small voice broke in. "Dad, can she stay for dinner?" Maria smiled gently, and for the first time in weeks, the kitchen felt alive. She helped Emma scramble eggs while Daniel sat by, his jaw tight, but his heart unexpectedly heavy. It wasn't just the food, it was the way Maria treated the house, the way she treated Emma. Not like they were broken, but like they were simply a family trying to find its rhythm again. Later that night, Daniel wheeled himself past Emma's room and paused. Maria had already gone home, but he could hear Emma humming softly as she brushed her hair, lighter than she had sounded in weeks. For a moment, Daniel let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Still, he told himself it didn't matter. He didn't need help, he couldn't afford to lean on anyone. But deep down, he knew, if Maria hadn't shown up that day, he and Emma would have fallen just a little further into the dark. The routine of life after the accident was harder than any construction job Daniel had ever taken on. At least back then he could sweat, curse and push through. Now even the smallest tasks felt like battles he could never win. One Saturday morning, Emma begged him to take her to the park. She wanted to practice soccer with her friends. Daniel hesitated, but she looked at him with those wide, hopeful eyes, and he gave in. They loaded into his van, the wheelchair lift whining as it lowered him down. By the time they reached the field, families were already gathering. Parents carried foldable chairs, tossed balls back and forth, shouted encouragement to their kids. Daniel parked at the edge of the lot, watching Emma run ahead with her ball. He tried to follow. The chair jolted forward, wheels bumping over cracks in the pavement. Halfway across, one wheel jammed in a shallow hole. Daniel shoved the joystick forward. Nothing. He shoved again, harder. The chair groaned but didn't move. Parents glanced over. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others looked away, embarrassed for him. Daniel's chest tightened, his face burned. Emma turned back, saw him stuck, and froze. "Dad," she called, her voice cracked. Daniel gripped the arms of the chair until his knuckles whitened. He wanted to roar, to stand up and prove he wasn't trapped like some helpless child. Instead, anger surged and spilled out in sharp words. "Just go play. Don't worry about me." Emma's eyes watered. She dropped the ball, running to him anyway. And that's when Maria appeared. She had been dropping her son off at the field and rushed over without hesitation. She crouched beside the chair, calm, steady, checking the wheel. "It's just a stone," she said softly, prying it loose. "You're good now." Daniel snapped before he could stop himself. "I told you I don't need help." For a moment, Maria looked at him, not with pity, not even with anger, but with a kind of quiet sadness. She straightened and placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Your dad's stronger than he thinks," she said gently. The words lingered long after she walked away. Daniel watched Emma's small hands clutch the arm of his chair, her eyes wide and uncertain. Shame washed over him. Not because he needed help, but because in pushing everyone away, he was hurting the one person he loved most. That night, when the house fell silent, Daniel sat in the dark living room. He replayed Maria's words over and over. Stronger than he thinks. He didn't feel strong, he felt broken. But maybe, Just maybe, she saw something in him he couldn't see yet. The soccer field incident haunted Daniel. He couldn't forget the way Emma's eyes filled with tears as he snapped at her. Shame followed him like a shadow, heavier than the chair he sat in. One evening, as the sun slipped low, Emma sat at the table with her math homework. Daniel rolled closer, pretending to help, but his mind wandered. He couldn't focus on the numbers. All he could see was the disappointment in her face. Finally, Emma dropped her pencil and looked at him. Her voice was small but steady. "Dad, can you at least try? Please? For me?" He frowned. "Try what?" "To walk again," she whispered. Her chin trembled, but she didn't look away. "I just need to see you try." The words cut deeper than any doctor's verdict. Daniel wanted to tell her it was impossible. The doctors had said it themselves, but looking at her, his daughter, his reason for everything, he couldn't crush her hope, not again. The next day, Maria arranged for a physical therapist to come to the house. Daniel wanted to refuse, but Emma's hopeful eyes kept him from saying no. The therapist strapped Daniel into a frame that lifted part of his weight, steadying him between two parallel bars. His palms sweat as he gripped the rails, his legs trembling like they belonged to someone else. "Just shift your weight," the therapist said gently. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing his right foot forward. For one glorious second it moved, an inch, maybe two. But then his strength gave out, his legs buckled, his arms slipped, and he crashed down hard onto the mat. The thud echoed through the room. Pain shot through his body, but worse was the humiliation. He lay there, gasping, sweat pouring, staring at the ceiling. A grown man, broken, defeated in front of his little girl. Daniel wanted to tell them to stop, to wheel him back into the chair and leave him there, but then he heard her. "Dad!" Emma's voice cracked as she rushed forward, kneeling beside him. Her tiny hands gripped his arm. Tears streaked her cheeks. "You tried, that's all I wanted, you tried." Daniel's throat burned. He pulled her close, his chest heaving. In that moment, something shifted. The pain was still there, the shame still raw, but beneath it all was a spark. Emma didn't care that he had fallen. She only cared that he had stood up and fought, even for a second. And for the first time since the accident, Daniel realised maybe that was enough. Not walking perfectly, not being who he once was, just fighting, for her. The therapy sessions became routine, each one grueling, each one leaving Daniel drenched in sweat and barely able to catch his breath. But Emma was always there. She clapped when he managed a shaky step, counted out loud when he held his balance for a few seconds, and cheered like he had just scored a touchdown. At home, little things began to change. One Saturday morning, Emma asked him to sit on the porch while she practiced soccer in the yard. Daniel wheeled himself outside, coffee in hand, and watched her kick the ball across the grass. She grinned, calling out, "You're my cheerleader now." For the first time in months, Daniel laughed. A real, full laugh that surprised them both. He clapped when she scored on the fence, and she bowed dramatically, both of them breaking into laughter until their sides hurt. For a moment, it felt like they had found their way back to each other. But not every moment was light. At school, whispers followed Emma. One boy had asked why her dad was stuck in a chair. Another had joked that he looked like an old man instead of a father. Emma bit her tongue, but the words burned inside her. That evening at dinner, she pushed her food around on the plate, unusually quiet. Finally, the words spilled out, sharp and trembling. "Why can't you just be normal again?" The silence that followed was crushing. Daniel's fork froze halfway to his mouth. He saw the instant regret in her eyes, but the damage was done. He swallowed hard, fighting the sting in his chest. "Emma," he said softly, "I wish I could. I wish more than anything I could give you that. But I can't promise to be the man I was before. What I can promise is that I'll never stop trying to be the dad you need now." Her lip trembled. She pushed her chair back, rushed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I didn't mean it," she whispered into his shirt. "I don't care if you walk. I just don't want you to quit." Daniel closed his eyes, holding her tight. The words cut deep, but they also healed. In her arms, he realised the truth. Emma didn't need him to be normal. She needed him to keep fighting, and for her, he would. Life had finally begun to feel steady again. The therapy sessions, the small victories, the laughter with Emma. Daniel could almost believe they were building something solid, one fragile step at a time. But peace never lasts forever. It started with a knock on the door. When Daniel opened it, Claire stood there, polished as ever. Her hair was perfect, her suit crisp, her expression cool. Beside her was a man in a dark blazer carrying a folder thick with papers. A lawyer. Daniel's stomach dropped. Claire didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've come for Emma," she said simply, her voice flat. "This arrangement isn't working. She deserves stability. She deserves better than this." Emma, who had been in the living room colouring, froze when she heard her mother's voice. Her eyes darted between them, confused and frightened. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheels of his chair. "Better than what? She has a home here. She has me." The lawyer cleared his throat and slid the folder onto the table. "Miss Thompson is seeking custody. Given your medical condition, the court may find her better suited to provide for Emma's needs." The words stung worse than any doctor's verdict. Daniel wanted to shout that he could take care of his daughter, that he was still her father. But the truth gnawed at him. He couldn't chase after Emma if she ran across the street. He couldn't even climb the stairs to check on her at night. The fear that he might lose her, not just in argument but in law, settled in his chest like a weight too heavy to bear. Emma's small voice broke the silence. "I don't want to go." Her eyes were wide, brimming with tears as she clutched the edge of his chair. "Dad, tell her I'm staying." Daniel's throat closed. He wanted to reassure her, but Claire's expression remained unmoved. "This isn't about what you want, Emma. It's about what's best for you." Maria arrived just as the lawyer was gathering his papers. She had come to drop off groceries, but stopped short when she saw the scene. Her eyes flicked from Claire to Daniel, reading the tension in the room. She didn't interfere, not yet, but her steady presence was enough to remind Daniel he wasn't completely alone. When the door finally closed behind Claire and her lawyer, the silence in the house was deafening. Emma pressed her face against her father's chest, sobbing. Daniel stroked her hair, staring at the folder on the table. His hands trembled as he whispered to himself, "I can't lose her. Not her." For the first time, the fight wasn't just about walking again. It was about proving, in every way possible, that he was still the father Emma deserved. The custody papers sat on the kitchen table like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Every time Daniel wheeled past, the sight of them twisted his stomach tighter. He had faced broken bones, long nights on construction sites, and the loneliness of a failing marriage. But nothing terrified him like the thought of losing Emma. For 2 days he barely spoke, replaying every doubt Claire's lawyer had dropped into the room. Maybe they were right. Maybe Emma deserved more than a dad who couldn't run after her, couldn't carry her upstairs, couldn't even drive her to school without help. Maria finally broke the silence. She found him late one evening in the living room, staring at the unopened folder. "You can't let them scare you into giving up," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "They don't need to scare me, Maria. The truth's already there. I'm not the father I was." She sat across from him, folding her hands. "Maybe not, but Emma doesn't need the father you were. She needs the father you are, the one who shows up, who tries even when it hurts. That matters more than you realise." Her words landed heavy. Daniel rubbed his face, exhausted, but something inside him stirred. He remembered the way Emma clutched his chair, begging not to go. He remembered her whisper in therapy, "I just want to see you try." The next morning, Daniel called the lawyer whose card Maria had slipped onto the table. His voice shook, but he forced the words out. "I'm not giving up custody. I'll fight." And so the fight began. Therapy sessions doubled. Daniel pushed his body harder than he thought possible. Each step with the walker burned, his muscles screaming, but he refused to stop. Emma came to the sessions after school, sitting cross-legged on the floor, cheering him on like it was the championship game. At night, Maria stayed late to help Emma with homework while Daniel practiced exercises in the living room. He hated needing help, but he began to see it differently now. This wasn't charity. This was family, in its rawest form, people holding each other up when they couldn't stand alone. One evening, as he collapsed into the chair after a particularly brutal round of therapy, Emma hugged him tightly. "I don't care what they say in court," she whispered. "You're my dad, and I'm not leaving." Daniel closed his eyes, fighting tears. The battle ahead would be ugly: lawyers, hearings, judgment. But for the first time, he didn't feel outmatched. Because this wasn't just his fight, it was theirs. The custody hearing was only weeks away, and Daniel could feel the pressure closing in. His lawyer reminded him of the arguments, the evidence, the paperwork. But Daniel knew none of that would matter if people believed he couldn't take care of Emma. He needed to show them, not just tell them. The chance came at the school's family night. The gym smelled faintly of popcorn and floor polish, the bleachers filled with parents and kids buzzing with excitement. Artwork lined the walls, and children tugged at their parents' hands, eager to show off their projects. Daniel rolled through the doors with Emma by his side, nerves crawling up his spine. When Emma's class walked onto the stage, she turned, scanning the crowd until her eyes found him. Daniel smiled, lifting a hand in a small wave. She grinned back, but he could see it, that flicker of worry. Would her dad always just be the man in the chair sitting on the sidelines? As the applause died down, Daniel felt a stirring in his chest. He glanced at the walker resting beside him. His therapist's words echoed, "Even 2 steps matter. 2 steps can change everything." Hands shaking, he pushed himself upright. The gym seemed to fall quiet. Parents turned, whispers rippling through the crowd. His legs trembled, sweat beading instantly at his brow, but he gripped the handles of the walker and shifted forward. 1 step, wobbly, slow, then another. By the 3rd step, his body screamed in protest, but he made it to the edge of the stage. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth, whispering, "Dad," before running down the stairs. She threw her arms around him as he clung to the walker, both of them trembling for different reasons. The room erupted in applause. Some parents wiped their eyes, others clapped until their hands stung. But Daniel barely heard it. All he felt was Emma's heartbeat against his chest, and the way she whispered, "I knew you could do it." Maria stood quietly at the back of the gym, her lips curved in a small, proud smile. She didn't wave or draw attention to herself. She just watched, knowing how much it had cost him to take those 3 steps, and how much more it had given Emma. As they left the gym that night, Daniel felt lighter. He hadn't walked across the room, hadn't performed a miracle, but he had stood up when it mattered. And for Emma, that was enough. The courthouse was colder than Daniel expected, the walls painted a dull grey, the kind of place where hope often felt out of place. He sat at the table with his lawyer, Emma's hand tucked into his. Across from him, Claire looked polished and distant, her lawyer ready with arguments about stability and best interests. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he didn't bother with legal terms. He spoke from the only place that mattered. "I can't promise I'll ever be the same man I was before the accident," he said, his voice low but steady. "But every day since, I've shown up for my daughter. She doesn't need a perfect father, she needs one who won't quit on her, and I never will." The room was silent until Emma's small voice carried across it. "I want to stay with my dad." The judge's ruling didn't come quickly, but when the decision was read, Daniel felt the air rush out of his lungs in relief. Custody would remain with him. Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She gathered her papers and walked out, her heels clicking against the tile until the sound faded away. That evening the house felt different. Not empty, not hollow, alive. Daniel wheeled himself onto the back porch, the smell of charcoal filling the air as burgers sizzled on the grill. Emma chased fireflies in the yard, her laughter ringing against the twilight. Maria sat nearby, shoes kicked off, her face soft with quiet pride. Then Daniel did something small but monumental. He gripped the edge of the grill, pushed himself upright, and stood for a few trembling seconds, just long enough to flip a burger. Emma gasped, clapping her hands. "Dad, you're standing." He laughed, easing back into his chair, breathless but smiling. "Yeah," he said softly, "for a little while." He didn't know if he would ever walk across a room again or climb stairs without help. The road ahead was uncertain, maybe always will be. But as Emma threw her arms around him and Maria looked on, Daniel realized something more important. He finally had a reason to keep fighting. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. And for the first time since the accident, he believed the future, whatever it looked like, was worth facing. Life doesn't always give us the victories we dream of. Sometimes the wins are small, an inch forward, a few shaky steps, or just the courage to try again when it hurts. But those small victories add up, and they can change everything. Daniel's story reminds us that strength isn't measured by how fast you recover, or how perfectly you stand. It's measured by the fight you give day after day for the people who matter most. And maybe that's a question worth asking yourself tonight. When life knocks you down, who or what gives you the reason to get back up? Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow night, right here on Rain Inside.